Um, Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you here tonight. Mani na pudni, nankina mayuna na mani, nadlu tapindi, nadlu gana, yatongaga in parendi. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all well. I just said that we are meeting tonight on Ghana land, and certainly many of us on this call. And we'd like to acknowledge elders of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Craig Wilkins. I'm the Chief Executive of the Conservation Council of South Australia, and I'm here on behalf of an alliance of around 24 different organisations that have put together a series of events and election survey and other election-related activity to try and get a sense of what parties and candidates are talking and thinking about when it comes to the environment. We know that South Australia has a very proud history as a visionary, inclusive and innovative state. We've led the way on smart environmental policy, from container deposit legislation to the creation of marine parks. We are now showing the world how to successfully transform our energy system by transitioning away from coal, oil and gas that cause dangerous climate change. And Elder is an electorate that could well determine the result of this state election. So tonight, we are keen to get a better sense of where each candidate stands on a range of nature and climate issues. Tonight, in terms of candidates, we have Nadia Clancy from the ALP, Matt Pastro from the Animal Justice Party, and Brock Lasser from the Greens. So the format is very shortly, I'll ask all the candidates to give an introductory statement. Then we've got a series of questions which have come through before the forum and also from our alliance partners on a range of different nature and climate issues. Then we will hopefully have some questions coming up, bubbling up from the floor as well, from people who are listening and watching. And I'll try and weave those in throughout the evening. And then hopefully this time, we should have time for a concluding statement from each of the candidates. So, certainly, if anyone would like to jump on and ask a question, please do. You can either use the chat function or the Q&A function, and I'll try and monitor it. And also, I've got David helping me here tonight. And if I miss anything, please, David, point that out to me, and we'll try and incorporate it. I think that's most of the intro stuff. This is a recorded session, and we are going to be sharing it afterwards to voters in the Elder electorate. And what we're finding is, this is about number 5 or 6 of these forums we've done. And what we're finding is the audience live is quite small, but when we share the video and share the snippets afterwards, there's quite a significant uptake and sharing of it. So there's clearly a lot of interest in what people are saying, and we really hope that this will be of value to you as candidates tonight to basically spread the word about what you believe in and what you'd like to achieve if you're elected. So let's go to the introductory statements. And I might do it in ballot paper order. And so I'll start with you, Nadia. Just about a 3 to 4 minute, just an intro statement about who you are and why you're standing.
Yeah, sure. I guess there's no Liberal Democrat who's number 1 here today. So I'm Nadia Clancy, the Labor candidate for the seat of Elder, and just also want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people. Like David said, we are really lucky in South Australia that we have been leaders. You know, we under the last Labor government, you know, South Australia became a renewable energy leader, not just in Australia, but in the world. And I do think that it really helped to push for renewable energy uptake to improve across Australia. And I think that there is more that we can do, and I'm excited about that. I also think we're so fortunate to have such incredible natural environments, both land and water, and we need to do everything we can to protect them, because once they're gone, they're gone. Once they're destroyed, and we can't. It takes, you know, these places have been created and these trees have been growing, and this has been happening for, well, I suppose millions of years, but tens of thousands of years in the way we see them now. And I think we need to ensure that everything we do through a climate change lens, and also just being aware that each project we might undertake can have an environmental impact, and just making sure we are doing the right thing, not just for people here now, but for the future. I am a scuba diver, so I'm a big fan of the underwater world and being respectful of it, and I want us all to be able to enjoy it. Absolutely support and Labor absolutely supports World Heritage listing for the Great Australian Bight, and we also have a policy around marine parks as well. So I look forward to hearing from everyone and hearing some questions as we move forward. But thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nadia. Next on the list is Matt. So over to you for your introductory statement.
Okay, hi Craig. Thanks for inviting all of us, and thanks for the acknowledgement of country. Many of our policies actually refer to consultation with First Nations groups around a range of issues, because we value their deep understanding of issues, as well as their history of sustainable use of the land and its resources. So having chatted with all the candidates from Elder, or at least all the ones that are here, one-to-one, I can say with a certain amount of confidence that everyone here wants to contribute to a better world. When I met with Nadia, and that was some time ago now, I learned about Nadia's commitment to voluntary work. She's done a lot in the area. She actually talked about having taken unpaid leave from her job since last October, because she really believes in what she's doing, and you know, this is really important to her. So I just think that's fantastic. I met with Carolyn as well. Unfortunately, she can't be here for whatever reason, but she talked to me about her time in nursing homes and how she was really passionate about working or supporting those people with dementia and their families. And you know, hopefully we also know about Carolyn's role in supporting women as Assistant Minister for Domestic Violence and Family Violence Protection. Brock and I had lots of conversations about the environment and the urgent need for action to combat climate change. I also learned about Brock's supportive views on marriage equality, and it was great meeting all three candidates. Brock and I, so what matters here is priorities. What are the pressing issues of our current times? We can't do it all, particularly in a world where we're busy patching up the damage that we've done. First and foremost, I try as best as I can to show kindness. That means kindness towards people, animals, and the planet. I firmly believe that when I'm acting from this mindset, I make decisions that are thoughtful and beneficial to as many as possible. What that means for me in politics is prioritising the environment, because I want a world where the kids I teach at school, so I'm a teacher, and my own kids at home can grow up without the fear of extreme weather, of global pandemics, and of an uncertain future. I'm aware that my fellow panellist, Brock Lasserf in particular, is also very passionate about this, and I believe prioritises this highly, and as you do too, Nadia. Where Brock and I differ though is my views on animals. So as a member of the Animal Justice Party, we acknowledge that animals are someone, not something. They feel pain, they feel fear, they feel loss, and they respond to love, just like us, so need to be treated kindly. This has massive implications in many directions with regard to the environment, with many species being classified as critical or endangered on an all too regular occurrence. We are the country with the worst mammal extinction globally. We also need to consider the impact of animal agriculture on our climate, our land, and our native animals, as well as the experience of those animals within agriculture. My priorities are not about economic reform. I won't be talking about spending money in various areas tonight. I'm part of a minor party, which means we won't hold the balance of power, but rather we'll be working with or against the government that is. This is an essential role in politics when it comes to decisions that impact on the environment or on animals, because too often they're overlooked. I'd really like the opportunity to talk about a number of animal-related issues tonight that were presented in the document released from the Conservation Society. If I was elected, or any other AJP member were elected, such as Louise Pfeiffer in the upper house, would be working in an advocate role. You could think of us as a thorn in the side of politics as we know it. I like to think of us as that good conscience angel that sits on the shoulders of decision makers. To reference a comment earlier this year made by our current Environment Minister, David Spears, there's only so many times you can deal with the Greta Thunbergs of South Australia. I am a Greta Thunberg of South Australia, and I won't be going anywhere. Speaking of, I'm interested to know whether or not David will be speaking tomorrow night. I know he's been invited. I would have considered a forum for the would be a high priority on his agenda. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, the latest I've heard is he isn't attending. He hasn't totally confirmed that yet, but that's certainly the indication I've had from his office, which is a real shame, because we would love the opportunity to have that conversation. And to be fair, that he's actually there is a reasonable record there of achievement over the term in terms of things like single-use plastic bans, protection of a range of areas, including creation of Australia's largest new national park in the Simpson Desert. So there's actually some really good stories to tell. And so it'd be lovely for him to be there to tell them. All right. Thank you, Matt. And now off to, I think Tom Richardson from Indalia describes him as the, with the most interesting name in South Australian politics, Brock the Surf.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I did see that post. Had a bit of a giggle. So yeah, thank you, and thanks to the Conservation Council of South Australia for having me on tonight. It's really good to be invited to speak about the importance of environment and climate to South Australians. And I wanted to start off by sharing a little bit about my own history and why I'm here today. So when I was 14, my geography teacher invited me and a few other students out to tour the Murray-Darling system around the lower lakes and the Mouth particularly. And what we witnessed was the impacts of what happens when an important natural resource like a river system is poorly managed through public policy and the devastation that can cause to communities and the local ecology. And one of my most vivid memories from that time was picking up a chisel and assisting a student from another school with the removal of tube worm castings off of the back of freshwater turtles, because the tube worms had invaded the lower lakes because of rising salinity levels, because we weren't getting enough fresh water to flush out the system. And since that day, I have paid attention to how our use of our natural resources impacts our environment and how that in turn impacts the communities living in those environments. And since its founding in 1992, the Greens Party has been a fierce advocate from an environment which is a stakeholder I feel is left out of the conversation all too often. And particularly against the backdrop of the policies of the 20th century, the environment was largely ignored and a blind eye was turned to the damage that was being done by many practices across many different industries. And this damage is now what we are either cleaning up or attempting to mitigate. And the most dangerous of this is contributing right now to climate change. And over my lifetime, I've seen a trend of changes across the country, including here in South Australia, where extreme weather events, sometimes described as those 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year events, they're now happening routinely all across the country. And we can see that right now in the east, where they're having terrible flooding, the worst they've had for 10 years. And even here at home in South Australia, bushfire seasons are starting earlier and they're finishing later. So now we've got concerns over the adequacy of our firefighting capabilities here and whether or not we're going to be resourced enough to face these fires going into the future. And these are just some of the immediate threats. There's also a lot of long-term threats, like threatening our water security here and the reduction of agricultural land. And globally, the rise of sea levels, how it's going to contribute to significant refugee crises in the future. But there isn't just all doom and gloom. There's opportunity out there for South Australia going forwards. Taking advantage of the transitioning of how our society and our economy works by taking advantage of opportunities that renewable energy has in store for us. And to get there, it is imperative that our politicians take this matter seriously, and for those with the right rhetoric, we need to see more action to match it. We need to accelerate our actions in this space, and the Greens will, as we have for 30 years, continue to fight for that future.
Great, thanks, Brock. And in fact, it's a great segue into our first question, which not surprisingly is around climate. And we're really interested in what practical action each of you and your parties will take if you are elected. So as Brock quite rightly pointed out, the flooding in the eastern states is a real pointer to a major shift in ground conditions. We can no longer say it's unprecedented because it's happening continuously now, whether it's flooding or bushfires or other extremes, heat waves, etc. And yet we are relatively well off compared to other places, as has been pointed out. So it is a major issue. There is no doubt that we are certainly very, very keen to see significant and fast climate action. So would love to get each of your thoughts around what sort of action you would take or you would push for. It looks like Nadia's got a friend, so I might actually perhaps go with to you, Matt, to start with this one.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Yeah, so with climate change, obviously we need to reduce our greenhouse emissions, and there's all those obvious things, like when it comes to transport being the biggest producer of carbon emissions in South Australia. There's also, I guess, making sure that our spaces are green so that we can actually, balance that. But my big question is, how can we achieve the reduction targets in carbon emission without investing in plant-based nutrition? So, obviously coming from the Animal Justice Party, where we're very focused on animals, I'm going to be largely talking about animal agriculture. Agriculture in general, next to transport, is the second biggest producer of CO2 in South Australia. But then it poses, animal agriculture in particular, poses a greater threat to climate, with additional issues around land clearing for grazing and for crops to feed animals, for water consumption, for methane emissions, for the excrement that gets washed into the waterways, not to mention erosion and, the spread of zoonotic diseases leading to future pandemics. And we're faced with another condition with the issue of the Japanese encephalitis entering South Australia, and only just recently being reported on in the last week. And that's caused by mosquitoes through pigs on pig farms. So a really good example of the detrimental effects of animal agriculture. So this is going to be very high on our list of priorities. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Brock, your thoughts on priorities around climate action?
Thanks, Craig. One of the big priorities I see from my perspective, and this is one of the reasons I decided to put my hand up as a candidate, is the paralysis of politics at the moment. The root cause of that seems to be money, and where that money is coming from to fund election campaigns. Now, a lot of people don't normally put hand in hand climate inaction with political donations, but I think it's a link that's becoming more and more apparent as time goes forward. So the Greens Party doesn't take donations from corporations, especially the fossil fuel lobby, because that does lead to an influence in how decisions are made and how policy is formed. In 2021, we saw over $1 million go to both major parties from those industries. And one does have to question, what's the benefit to those corporations that do that? So the Greens wants to tackle donation reform as part of our climate policy. Another thing we want to do is Australia's contribution is often understated, I find, where people go, oh, we're only responsible for 1.2% of total global emissions. Well, that's primary emissions. What you're forgetting about is the secondary emissions. So our coal and our gas exports that are going overseas, those are going to get burnt, those are going to get consumed, those are going to produce more emissions overseas. And we might not be holding the gun, but we're putting the bullets in that respect. So the Greens want to stop new coal and gas mines, and we want to stop construction of new power stations as well. And we want to redirect that money towards supporting renewable energy industries and to help speed our transition away from fossil fuels. We also want to tackle things like the electric vehicles tax. Taxes are used to disincentivize things you don't want people to be doing. So why are we taxing using electric vehicles? That doesn't really make a lot of sense in that space.
Great, thanks, Brock. And Nadia, your thoughts around this one in terms of what priorities you would really push for in terms of urgent climate action?
Thank you. I remember, similar to Brock, like I remember being in year 10, which was back in the year 2000, and hearing about climate change and being like, oh, I'm sure the adults have got this sorted. You know, I'm sure all the politicians are making sure they're taking action, and being quite devastated when I discovered that was not the case. And I'm sure a lot of, I feel like now there are, you know, kids in year 2 who know that the adults aren't getting it done. And it's really, really distressing that there has been so many years of inaction. As Brock said, you know, political donations are an issue, and that's why we've announced, PNM has announced that if we form government, we will seek to ban political donations in South Australian elections. And as Matt raised, obviously transport is the #1 leading source of greenhouse gas emissions in SA. It's about a third, I think. And that's something that we need to actually address in a number of ways. So I think one thing is that public transport needs to be for people and not for profit. We need to make it accessible to as many people as possible. That means not cutting services. And for Labor, it means if we form government, buying our train and tram services back so that they are operated by the state government and they're not being driven by profit margins. We will also get rid of the Liberal government's electric vehicle tax, and we will make public transport free all the time for seniors to make it that bit easier and just more attractive. I think public transport should be the attractive option, and if not public transport, getting on your bike, or I think I saw a question pop up from Andrea, like, oh, get on your electric bike, like Andrea is, because I see like a really exciting future for all of us if we can make it easier to cycle, make it safer, and also make it safer for pedestrians. And where we can't do those things, utilising public transport and making that as easy as possible. So that's me.
Great, thanks Nadia. And there's actually not just Andrea's question tonight, but a series of questions before the forum has come through around transport. So I'm really keen to dive deep into that tonight. But before I get to that, just wanted to just follow up briefly, Nadia, around the climate question, because you mentioned before around that tremendous legacy from the Weatherall government and the Rand government around renewable energy, which the Marshall government has continued to their credit, which has really placed us as a global leader around renewable energy. But there are sort of two sides to the energy equation. There's the promotion of the good stuff, but there's also the stopping of the bad stuff. And we're certainly seeing increasingly international experts like the International Energy Agency saying we need to stop all new exploration of oil, gas, and coal. And in South Australia, that really is around gas. So really keen to get a sense of what Labor's view is around the future of gas in South Australia, and would they be willing to scale back and essentially stop all exploration for expansion?
I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that question. I know that Susan Close is, who's our deputy leader and our shadow environment minister, is very, very interested and passionate about this area, but I'm not able to provide you with an answer on that one, I'm sorry. But I can say that in terms of hydrogen, we have said that we would build a state government-owned hydrogen facility, and that will be creating green hydrogen, which we understand. Obviously, hydrogen varies, and it's very energy intensive to make. which means that it can be good for the environment and it can also be bad. So in South Australia, because we have so much renewable energy, we are in the best position to be able to make green hydrogen. And we're at the moment, when there is a lot of renewables in the system, it can destabilise the grid. Hydrogen can help to stabilise again, so that instead of at the moment when there's heaps of renewables going in there and it's starting to get a bit tricky, at the moment the government just basically turns off your solar panels. I mean, you'd know, be able to explain this better than me, Craig, but basically turns them off. And so that you no longer are using that energy is not going into the grid. And so what Labor want to do is want to make sure all of that energy is used, the excess energy is used to make green hydrogen that can then be easily stored and then can go back in when it's needed. And it can also be used to be exported to countries who are also trying to make a transition out of away from coal.
Great, thanks, Nadia. And then still very much on this climate question, but it's also been mentioned tonight by a number of people, is around the importance of preserving our tree canopy, because essentially the big trees across our city have a massive role to play in keeping our cities cool. I mean, there's been some research in the western suburbs of Adelaide which showed that suburbs and streets with higher levels of mature trees had around 6 degrees cooler temperature than other suburbs that didn't have those trees, which in a heat wave is essentially the difference between life and death. So we certainly see preservation of our tree canopy as an essential part of that climate resilience. And we actually have some of the worst and weakest tree protection laws in the country. And as a result, we are now losing thousands, tens of thousands of trees every year. And we're actually going backwards in terms of government targets around tree canopy. So we're really keen as an alliance to see a shift in that and some law reform to change that. So really keen to see what each of you think about what the potential is for law reform to try and turn the situation around. I'll start with you, Brock, then Matt, then Nadia. So over to you, Brock.
Thanks, Craig. So yeah, you are right. And SA does have amongst the weakest tree protections in the country. And the Greens have introduced legislation previously to try and combat this. So Mark Parnell in 2012 introduced a bill, amended the laws around development. And that was triggered in response to the Glenside development. So what happened there was 76 protected trees under the Act were effectively just cut down without so much the discussion in Parliament, which was what was required before that could proceed because the regulations allowed it at the time. So all of those trees were just cut down, removed, gone forever. And they were big, beautiful trees. And as we all know, they don't grow up overnight. It takes decades for them to reach the size needed to achieve those reductions in temperature and to have those canopies provide all of those benefits to the built environment. So the Greens want that legislation passed. That's what we want. And we also want additional measures to be put in place. So for example, when tree removal companies cry foul because a landowner or a developer has gone, oh, we've got the approvals, don't worry about it, just cut down the tree. No, they should have done their due diligence and they should have asked the correct questions, and they also need to be held accountable for these trees being cut down. So we want the fines also for breaching these protections to be increased. Currently, sadly, they're relatively modest and they're being factored in as part of routine business expense, as part of developments. Like, they're meant to be a disincentive to do it, and if they're not achieving that objective, then they need to be increased. And we'd also like to investigate potentially landowners and developers being incentivized to keep and protect those trees. So wherever possible, potentially by providing, for example, rate discounts to landholders of exceptional trees, and providing a rate discount over that time that's then reimbursed by the state government to make up for the lost council revenue. So those are a couple of things that the Greens Party would like to see being done.
Thanks, Brock. Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, okay. So Animal Justice Party considers land clearing to be both an environmental and an animal welfare disaster. I've read the document, Comparison of Australia's Tree Laws, which I believe, Craig, you were part of putting together. I looked at their recommendations at the end of the document, and I thinking about the idea of offsetting trees, like Brock mentioned before, about the fact that you've got a very small tree compared to a very big tree, and the impact that has in terms of environment. It also has a massive impact for animals. So if you remove a tree, you're removing habitat, obviously. So that's really important. And I was really delighted to see in your recommendations, Craig, that even considering the removal of dead trees, because dead trees can also be habitats for animals. So, that needs to be considered as well, not even just the living trees. So we would certainly be in full support of the recommendations. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say about that one. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. Nadia, what's your view on this one?
I agree, Brock. It's not Labor Party position, so someone protect me from everyone getting annoyed with me. But I agree, it just shouldn't be so easy to, sorry, this is Tiana. It shouldn't be that easy to remove trees. And you're right, it is just being considered as part of the cost of developing property. It is not seen as a disincentive, but which I think it absolutely should be. Labor has also said we will allocate 10% of developer contributions to the Planning and Development Fund to allow councils to buy land to create pocket parks and to open space in Adelaide. And we have also said that we will revise tree regulations to match Australian best practice to also protect and increase the green canopy in Adelaide. Another thing is obviously we want to restore the full protection to like Helen Mayo Park. We don't want to be seeing basketball stadiums on our parklands. We would like to protect our parklands as much as possible. And if we're going to do something on our parklands, it should be creating places for people to walk or run or cycle, not be putting buildings and cutting down trees.
Great, thanks, Nadia, and good on you for soldiering on. Yes, the challenges of Zoom calls from home. No worries. Thanks, Joe, for that comment. She says too many trees cut down for major road developments, and that's certainly part of our call for law reform, is that currently there are exemptions for the transport departments to essentially ignore normal planning rules around consultation and trying to find better solutions. So that's one of the things we're certainly looking for. So trees are a big factor in sort of community concern around the planning and design code, and I would love to touch on that now with everyone. So many people in the community and involved in our alliance have expressed a range of concerns about the planning and design code, whether it's around heritage protection in places like Coonalark Gardens, or it is trees or water or climate resilience, flooding. There's and infill development. There's a range of different aspects which have raised concerns, as well as community consultation about the ability of the community to have a say in this one. So really keen to hear what everyone of you thinks around what should happen to the planning and design code over the next 4 years. I'll start with you, Matt, then Nadia, then Brock.
Thanks, Craig. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Jody just the other day when I went to the Pasadena Community Centre drop-in. So this is a fantastic community initiative. They've built haven't built anything actually. They've bought some land with a building already on it. And I was having a great conversation with one of the people that worked there about the decision not to bulldoze it and actually keep it as the building it was, probably made in the 70s. So it'd be a 50-year-old building now. And I was really delighted to see that in this kind of age, we do have this mentality of just, knocking things down and putting something else up in its place. And I think, you know, where we can avoid that, we should, because, you know, there's obviously there's a lot of the resources that are being wasted, and it can also contribute to you know, the habitat loss of animals. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to animals because that's my thing. Yeah, so I mean, it's a great building. It's a very solid building. It's got great walls for, you know, insulation properties, and you know, for both heat and sound, because they've got all sorts of fantastic things planned for that space. So, you know, I think that's a really good example of where we don't need to knock something down. In the place that I'm living at, I've got 12 apartments that are going up next door. And, you know, to my disappointment, looking at the apartments, there's very little green spaces, virtually nothing at all. As far as I can see, they haven't really considered passive solar space heating. You know, the north-facing walls have hardly any windows, and, you know, no deciduous trees, no awnings. You know, that's concerning, that there doesn't seem to be enough that's offsetting the fact that they are, you know, replacing old buildings with new ones. I think, you know, if we think about, you know, a net positive, you know, gain, like if we're trading, you know, taking something down and, you know, considering, you know, how we can actually put something in its place, it's going to be sustainable and, you know, better for the environment, great. But we need to think about the impact on the environment, which includes habitat loss as well. So yeah, that's my take. One plus I did see, to the credit of my next door neighbours, they do have rainwater tanks. So, you know, that is something that's actually happening. They're putting rainwater tanks into new developments. So I guess we've got to, you know, focus on those good things when they happen too. So thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, South Australia has a fantastic history of rainwater tank installation. There actually are some flaws in the planning design code around rainwater tank being plumbed into new builds. So that's certainly one thing our alliance is keen to see shifting as part of our asks. But yeah, Nadia, your thoughts about what does Labor think about the planning design code, and what do they think should change?
Yeah, so we would do a review into the implementation, particularly looking at the environmental impact, particularly around how the tree canopy is currently being affected in developments. I just, like, from my personal experience, we just did a small extension, and when I met with the builder, I said, oh great, I need a grey water system. And he was like, oh no, we don't do that, that's not to code. I said, oh, I'm pretty sure you can do a grey water system. But that was they pushed and pushed and pushed and said no. And then when they started to, you know, put the slab down, my partner went out there and said, well, I'm making a grey water system, so you can have a plumber sign it off and watch me do it. And that's how and now we have a grey water system. But that's how hard we had to fight, and we had to, like, my partner had to physically do the plumbing himself so that we could get a grey water system. I just think so much more education is needed for the industry, and perhaps they all know and they just can't be bothered. But I think if we keep sort of putting our money where our mouth is when we're making those individual decisions, I'm hoping that we can affect change. Because you're right, Matt, like, you walk past new developments and there's no eaves, and there's been no consideration for the positioning of a home. My brother-in-law has built a home which has a 7-star energy rating. It's quite incredible, and it's one of, you don't have to go this hard, but there are ways to do it, where it's a solar passive house. So there's, you know, the thermal mass walls and the high windows, and, you know, the positioning in a way that you capture the sun in winter and you are able to avoid it in the summer. Like, there are simple things that we can do that I think we should be encouraging our developers to be doing, to make sure our homes don't even, like, my brother-in-law's place doesn't need air conditioning or heating at any time. It's perfectly 24 degrees year round, except for that time when it got to 46 degrees outside, it went up to 26 degrees inside. It's something that I personally am very, very passionate about and interested in, and I would be really keen to have those discussions with caucus if I'm lucky enough to be elected. Obviously, on top of that, there's what I was talking about earlier in terms of the developer contributions going into the development fund and actually being used for pocket parks, and also, again, revising our tree regulations. But yeah, they're my little bit of Labor Party stuff and a little bit of my personal views.
Great, thanks, Nadia. And over to you, Brock. Does the plan design code need changing, and if so, in what way?
So I think you're absolutely right, and Matt and Nadia have already covered that off pretty extensively. Like this cookie cutter mentality in development, where you just plonk a cheap to erect house without any thought to what the maintenance on that is in the long term in terms of energy and water efficiency is just nuts. And we need to start thinking about that in the longer term. We should be making changes to the code to facilitate more efficient housing for people. And yeah, I can't agree more with what Nadia said about protecting the parkland. Like this idea that we should just be paving over paradise and parklands is just nuts to me. So yeah, definitely changing the code to empower businesses and residents to make those buildings more efficient should be a priority. And also, as Matt mentioned, when we're talking about community consultation around putting these new developments in, I think the third-party appeal rights, which have been removed from residents, need to be reinstated as well, because that's just a blatant stacking of the deck in favour of developers. And I think, yeah, that needs to be restored to residents. Residents should have a say over what goes down in their local communities. And further, when we're declaring in principle support for proposed developments, that shouldn't be done until the proposal is assessed under the SA Native Vegetation Act, so through the Native Vegetation Council, and also until the approvals under the Federal Environment Protection Biodiversity Protection Act 1999. That also needs to be taken into consideration, and it currently isn't, which is unfortunate. So in principle, support should be withheld until those checks are done. They're not effective checks and balances if they're advice that can be thrown away at the end of the day.
Great, thanks, Brock. So now I reckon we should jump into the transport question, because yeah, this is definitely a big theme that's come up through and before this forum. So I'll start with the question from Andrea, with a real focus on active transport. So this is walking and cycling, and I suppose that's one of the real advantages of living in Elder, is the ability to easily walk and cycle throughout the community. But there are certainly still a lot of barriers for people to do more. And so the focus of Andrea's question is really around the infrastructure improvements, which put rider and pedestrian safety as a focus of all roads in Elder and across South Australia. So she's looking for a commitment for action on this, and if so, what particular projects and how you achieve this. So perhaps Matt, starting off with you for this one.
Yeah, thanks again, Craig. Yes, I agree. Most of Elder is pretty flat and easy to get around. I did some leaflet drops at Panorama the other day, and you can actually see my lives on my on my Facebook page. It's pretty funny. I got pretty sweaty, and I had a great time though. It was terrific. Yeah, I'm a keen cyclist. I love getting around on a bike. So I'm a really, really strong believer in making our roads more bike friendly and less car friendly. And that's not just talking about Elder too. That's talking about the city. A lot of us commute into the city. I work at St Mary's College in the city, and the idea of driving into the city should be harder. It should be harder for people, as much as people might not want to hear that. Cars are just such a terrible impact on our environment, and even the idea of just transitioning from petrol engine cars to solar cars, hopefully solar cars one day, electric cars, you know, I mean, we still got to dig lithium out of the ground to provide batteries for the cars, you know. So there's always going to be environmental, you know, if they're made overseas, then the transport coming. So we do have to think about active forms of transport. We do have to, like Nadia mentioned before about, you know, our rail system, our public transport, that definitely needs some major overhaul, you know, and I hope eventually, you know, moving to, you know, more environmental, renewable energy sources for, you know, for those vehicles as well. I would also argue in the city, we've talked about, you know, making sure that we don't encroach on that land around the city. When Nadia mentioned, you know, the infamous basketball stadium. I would also say, you know, getting fewer car parks and replacing those car parks with, you know, natural spaces for, you know, for the animals, and just trying to discourage people from driving. I know people probably don't want to hear that, but, you know, we all actually have to make some sacrifices to, you know, to help the environment. And if the city is a more beautiful place to be in and makes people feel better and is a more comfortable place to take your bike, or to be walking around, then, you know, there are some gains as well. We've got to you know, always think about what are we going to gain rather than what are we going to have to give up. Was there anything else I wanted to? Oh yeah, another thing about transport is, you know, the idea of, I mean, one issue with COVID that's maybe a positive thing, and you know, we're experiencing it now, is that you don't always have to leave your house to work. You know, and so encouraging more people to work from home. I mean, I have a number of friends that, as a result of the pandemic, are now working from home, even though they don't need to, because it, you know, it suits their lifestyle. You know, they have a smaller carbon footprint, and, you know, less wear and tear on the roads. You don't have as much pollution coming off the roads as well, and, you know, hopefully there will be less need to upgrade roads. Because, you know, when we upgrade roads, you know, again, we're impacting on, you know, animal habitats. We're taking away those much needed trees that, you know, are contributing to our canopy. So, yeah, I think I would probably have some more things to say, but that they're the things that have come to me now. So thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Brock, your thoughts?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Matt said about working from home. I bought a new car at the end of 2019. I think it's done 10,000 Ks in the 2 years since I've had it. So it's largely just been an ornament for my driveway. The Greens very much want to make public transport more accessible for people. So we want to make that free for all residents of South Australia. And I think that's pretty poignant considering what the global fuel market is looking like it's about to do. So at the moment, the highest price of of fuel in Adelaide today was $2.10 a litre. That's insane. And the average price is $1.89 across the city. That's just crazy. I don't see how that's affordable for a lot of people moving forward. And we need to offer alternatives for people to be able to move about that doesn't involve driving a car. And just like Nadia, we want to bring back public transport back into the control of the state government where it should be. It's not there to make money for private companies. It's there to provide an essential service for people in South Australia. We're also committed to investing money into the public transport system over the next 4 years. I mean, what we want to do, what we want to see happen is we want to increase the reliability and the frequency of our existing services. And we also want to see electrification projects be completed. So I know they're doing work at the Gawler line at the moment, but they also need to remember they haven't finished electrifying the full length of the Bel Air line, and we want to see rail being extended all the way through the Adelaide Hills and Mount Barker region. And why do we want to see that? We want to pull cars off of the Southeastern Freeway and off of Cross Road. We want to reduce the pollution that creates, not just in terms of air pollution, but noise pollution as well. And in terms of active transport, one of the things I'd love to see is a better or a more improved interface between the two. So cycling at the moment, unless you're going to cycle onto a train, you're not going to be able to take your bike with you. You have to figure out a way to leave it. And I know I used to live in Canberra, and one of the things they had on some of the bikes there, sorry, on the buses there, is a bike rack at the front of the bus where you can store a couple of bikes for cyclists. It's just simple solutions like that which can actually facilitate better use of the public transport system. And setting up more bike cages at interchanges would also assist with that. So those are just a couple of changes that I'd like to see. And another thing that I've always found quite interesting is when you're using trains, you have to pay an additional fee to bring your bike on board, which is just bizarre and it's just crazy. It's penalizing cyclists for doing the right thing and not putting another car on the road, which is in turn holding up traffic for everyone else. So those are a couple of changes that I'd love to see.
Thanks, Brock. And Nadia, active transport, what would you do?
So you've heard my public transport spiel, so I'll go straight into active. Matt is right. Panorama is brutal, not in terms of anything other than in terms of walking around. And other than the steepness, there's also some issues around Panorama and parts of Pasadena in terms of a lack of footpaths. And I actually think we need to be making these areas safe to walk around and to sort of, make it so that they incentivize people to walk or ride. So if I'm elected, a Labor government will give the City of Mitcham an additional $500,000 to put into footpaths in Panorama and Pasadena to make those areas much more easier to navigate by foot. I also have been door knocking a lot, and early last year I spoke with a few people in Clarence Gardens who really struggle to get across to Cumberland Park and then vice versa, so to access various schools and kindergartens and sporting facilities and to shops. It's quite difficult to actually access the other side because Winston Avenue can be very, very busy. And so I contacted the council saying that lots of people had asked for a pedestrian crossing there, and they went and did a traffic study and they agreed that it is something that the community needs, which was fantastic. I love a good result. And so they are putting in a pedestrian crossing there, which will really benefit people and mean that, instead of parents saying, oh, but I just don't have to deal with crossing with the children to get to kindy, I'll just drive. It's actually going to be really great that there's another incentive to make it easier to walk or ride, really. Andrea, who is on here, has also been working really, really hard on a similar issue on Springbank Rd with the challenges of navigating Springbank in peak hour to get children across to school, or to get yourself, an adult, across to, use Mortlock Park and have your dog run around or whatever it might be. It is really challenging to get between Panorama and a bit of Pasadena across Springbank to get to Kenlight Gardens and vice versa. And I have written to the Department of Infrastructure and Transport on that issue and gotten a pretty lackluster response. So if I'm elected, it's something I would be keen to keep working on, because I think instead of the first response being, oh, that's going to slow down traffic, I don't really think that's good enough. And I think that we actually need to be prioritising people who are walking or riding. And the City of Marion and City of Mitcham are both doing some great work with bike paths at the moment. And as someone who used to be a cyclist to the gym every morning until I got knocked off my bike on South Road and then completely lost my nerve and am way too scared, and then just started driving to the gym, which I know is ridiculous. But it just scared me. And I actually know a lot of people who have been put off cycling because they haven't felt safe. And I think that we need to be encouraging as many cycling routes as possible to keep people safe and make it easier to jump on your bike. I love riding. I love, like, my little girl rides to school every morning and it's the best. Other than, obviously, we're focused on the environment tonight. Absolutely. But I just don't want to forget, like, the good, like, the amazing thing it does for our mental health. Instead of jumping in a car and taking our children to school or going to work, going to the shops, and taking that time where we can to walk or ride. I don't know about you guys, but for me, it just makes the beginning of my day, or makes that moment, like that period of 10 minutes or whatever it might be, so much better, being able to have that fresh air and just enjoy it. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Nadia, and apologies, I dropped out there for a sec, so I'm not sure if David jumped in and
You
asked
missed it
questions.
all. It was fantastic, Craig. Like, it was probably the best presentation you've ever seen.
I bet. Yeah, actually, there was, and it sounds like you've been talking about this issue, which is the next question I was going to ask, which was is around the Springbank Road intersection and ability to cross that. So was that actually a specific question, David? Did you just jump in and ask that, or can I jump in there now, do you think?
No, go for it, Craig.
All right, fantastic. So one of the questions that came up before the tonight's forum was around the Springbank Road intersection, so the upgrade with Good Road. So people are pointing out that it's now complete, resulting in increasing traffic volumes using this suburban road and raising safety concerns for vulnerable people, walkers and riders who need to cross Springbank Road, particularly school children and Bedford workers living with disabilities. Will you commit to undertaking urgent action to provide safer pedestrian crossing options for Springbank Road? And alongside that, there's people pointing out that it takes up to 11 minutes to actually enter into Springbank Road from streets, and it's no longer safe to walk children to school and cross Springbank Road safely. So there's been a series of questions which have come up around that safety aspect of the Springbank Road intersection and upgrade and the larger Springbank Road issue. So keen for everyone's thoughts around that, and apologies if you've already covered this while I was offline. So maybe I'll start with you, Nadia, around this, seeing as you were in such good flow.
Thank you. So I actually kind of already spoke about this one. So yes, completely understand it's a huge issue for a lot of people. I appreciate Andrea and the rest of the community's advocacy on this issue. I said, Craig, that I had written to the Department for Infrastructure and Transport actually a number of months ago, even before I spoke to Andrea about it, and have since received a response which was like, oh no, we've looked at it and it's not necessary. I also spoke to, even though it's not a council road, I also have spoken to the City of Mitcham about it again. Because, yeah, as I said, I just think that we need to be prioritising people's safety and make it easier for people to walk or ride, rather than just immediately going, but it's going to make the cars have to slow down for a second and it might not be as fast for them. I don't think that should be our priority.
Great, thanks, Nadia. Brock, your view on this one?
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that cars have been prioritised in this respect, and I don't think that's fair to the people that live in that area. And I think absolutely we need to start looking at ways to facilitate the residents in that area to be able to go about their lives, and not all of them should be forced to be using vehicles. So in that particular case on Springbank Road, yeah, we need to start making it more accessible to people using bicycles or pedestrians walking, or using alternate modes of transport. And I think this is a symptom of a much larger issue, which is a constant approach to congestion busting just seems to be build bigger, better roads. And all that does is attract more and more vehicles, and it doesn't actually solve the issue in the long term. So going back to the public transport and active transport facilitation discussion, I think that's the solution to this problem in the long term. Not more roads, it's better, more reliable and cheaper public transport.
Thanks, Brock. And Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think both Nadia and Brock raised some really excellent points just about, firstly, when Nadia was talking about safety, because I do think, you know, when you're questioning safety, then obviously we need to do stuff. We need to do things. We actually may need to develop things. You know, when Brock talked about the idea of widening roads and encouraging more cars, I think that is exactly what happens, and we do need to try to discourage that. You know, Craig, with this issue, you talked about the people from Bedford Park and you know, those that have disabilities getting across the road too, and that being a safety issue. And I noticed on the chat there were some points being made about people with disabilities too, and moving around spaces. We can't all be active, so we need to actually consider people that find it really hard to get about too, and modes of transport that can accommodate them. that aren't car or, even like a one car for one person kind of scenarios. So I can't think of anything to add to other than that to, both Brock's and Nadia's really excellent answers to this question.
Great, thanks, Matt. And then the other aspect of transport which has come up strongly is around Crossroad, and I know that a number of people tonight have been involved in previous forums around this issue, but there's a lot of concern in order around the impact of a potential widening of Crossroad as the direction of freight traffic heads down the freeway to South Road. And we as an alliance are really interested in seeing if we can redirect that traffic away from Adelaide streets as much as possible through as many options as possible, and essentially stop Crossroad becoming this massively increased road with huge impacts in terms of air pollution and congestion. So really keen for everyone's thoughts around what needs to happen to ensure Crossroad remains a road that is not overtaken by freight. Brock, you first, and then Nadia, then Matt.
Thanks, Craig. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And at the moment, it is becoming a freight thoroughfare. And as that north-south corridor continues to be built up and there's no alternative options for freight, they're just going to keep thundering down that road. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that that Greater Adelaide bypass at Murray Bridge is set up and that it redirects those freights, the freight traffic around the city. We'd be the only developed city on the planet that has a main freight thoroughfare through the middle of a suburban city. Like it's just crazy. So we need to absolutely take steps to redirect that freight. And in addition to that, hammering on about it again, we need to make sure that that rail network is attached to through the Adelaide Hills and up to Mount Barker, because it's not just freight that's going down there. It's a whole heap of commuters from one of the fastest growing satellite cities in the country. And we need to make sure that those additional commuters, those additional motorists are given all public transport alternatives, proper public transport alternatives.
Thanks, Brock. Nadia, what's your thoughts around how we can ensure that Crossroad doesn't get overtaken by freight?
Yeah, so Labor is going to continue the bypass study to get the trucks to go behind the hills. And we've also said that we wouldn't be approving any projects that would widen the road. Yes, thank you. Sorry. We wouldn't be approving any projects that would make the road more easier for trucks and make it a freight connector. So we've committed to bypass study and not doing any projects to widen or make it easier for trucks to get down.
Thanks, Nadia. And Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a terrible thing, Crossroad. I love the road. Like, it's a beautiful road and you've got all those lovely trees along the side of the road. You have a couple of schools on the road too, so there are safety issues for students on the schools. It's tricky. When there's development, obviously, there's environmental costs too. So if you're widening Crossroad, there's going to be environmental costs, and as Brock mentioned before, you've got increased flows of traffic. But then if you're needing to cause bypasses, you're also going to be having development. So I guess you have to weigh up what's the most beneficial to the environment and to us and to the animals. Yeah, thanks
Matt. Next question is going to be a tough one for Matt in particular. Wondering what your view is around duck and quail hunting. Do you think it should be banned? I'll start with Matt in particular.
Okay, you're asking me. Okay, well, it goes without saying, doesn't it? I think it's appalling that we still have it. You know, there are several other states. I'm going to find some quotes because, yeah, let me just scroll through my things here. Duck hunting. Had some great quotes from, yeah. So in 1990, this is the Western Australian Premier Carmen Lawrence said, "Our community has reached a stage of enlightenment where it can no longer accept the institutionalised killing of native birds for recreation." 1990. 2005, Queensland Premier Peter Beattie said, "It's time to ban the recreational shooting of duck and quail. This is not an appropriate activity in contemporary life in the smart state." Now, Liberal don't have a policy at all. I know Labor have said that they're going to look into it, have an inquiry. I just don't understand why we're even talking about inquiries now. I just think, you know, it's a very cruel thing to do. You know, the number of ducks that are injured and not killed, or not killed instantly, that die over a number of hours in pain, often, you know, drowning because they can't hold their heads above the water, because when they get shot, you know, they land in the water. You know, the ducks that haven't reached full maturity suddenly don't have parents because, you know, they're separated due to ducks being killed. There are also issues when they're, you know, hitting non-targeted species, so the rarer ducks too. So, you know, there are environmental concerns too, sustainability concerns. You know, I know the gun lobby is a very powerful force, and you know, obviously has a bit of sway in terms of the governments, but I'm appalled that it exists. And you know, obviously I have a number of friends and, you know, people in the Animal Justice Party that feel as strongly as I do. I find it really disgusting. You know, we're not against guns. You know, shoot whatever you like, as long as it's not an animal. You know, there are clay pigeons. You know, the targets that they shoot into the air, and you know, you can shoot those into your heart's content. But yeah, I can't believe in this day and age we're still even having to debate it.
Thanks, Matt. Brock, what's your view?
My view is we probably shouldn't be doing this practice anymore. Like it doesn't make sense to be in this day and age to be hunting. Like if you are serious enough that you want to be shooting animals, become a pest controller. Like there are other species which really do need to be managed. It's not popular with some people, but it's a real concern for some rural areas. Wild pigs, for example, can be a real danger to farmers and their livestock. So with the duck and quail hunting, I just don't think there's a place for it anymore.
Thanks, Brock. And Nadia, what's the Labor Party's position on this one?
I'm just trying to not look at Matt. The Labor Party's position is to do a review. Sorry, Matt.
Thanks, Nadia. Alrighty, so it looks like we've gone through most of the ones that are specific for elder. So keen to ask a few questions about broader environmental issues from across the state, because as a parliamentarian, you'll be not just representing elder, but you'll actually be making decisions about the whole state. So I'll run through. There's a range of ones. I'll run through them hopefully relatively quickly. So perhaps looking for sort of shorter answers, we'll try and get through more issues if we can. So the first question is around if you support World Heritage protection for the Great Australian Bight. I'll start with you, Nadia.
Oh, Craig, you went mute, mate. Is that because I unmuted myself?
Oh, no. I jumped in too quick. So yeah, Nadia, then Brock, then Matt.
Yes, we do support heritage listening.
Fantastic. Yeah, Brock, what's the Greens' view?
So the Greens absolutely support the World Heritage listing of the Australian Bight, and Senator Sarah Hanson-Young introduced legislation in 2019 to try and facilitate that federally. So the Greens absolutely want this to happen, and we're also fervently campaigning to protect Bight from oil and gas mining.
Great, thanks, Brock. And Matt?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if it is World Heritage listed, that would mean there would be no mining. Is that right?
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
Yeah.
definitely that is one of the outcomes. And that's
Yeah. So
big
obviously
part of the
we're
reason for
trying to move away from oil and natural gas, and we certainly don't want to see any new developments. So we would be 100% behind it. I'd love to give you a long answer and talk about all the species of animals that that are under threat. Not to mention the risk of oil spills that would not only threaten that space, but Adelaide's coastlines, Kangaroo Island. There's even some models talking about the impact on Tasmania. It's absolute. I mean, if one day people were mining, the Great Australian Bight, it would be an absolute tragedy. So, absolutely against it, or it's in support of World Heritage listing. Yeah, for sure. The whales, southern right whale, already, facing extinction, and that's a vital breeding ground for that whale as well. So. I could give you a long answer. That's my short answer.
That's great. That's perfect. Thank you, Matt. Next one is around the proposed nuclear waste facility at Kimber. So for those of you who aren't familiar with that ones, we've got a federal government who would like to shift radioactive waste from Lucas Heights in Sydney and park it in South Australia in above ground storage while they work out what to do with the waste longer term, because international best practice is to bury it deep underground. So there's a range of concerns, including fierce opposition from the Bangala traditional owners. Really keen to get each of your parties' view about whether you would support the federal government's action or look to oppose it. So starting with you, Nadia.
I'm just frantically texting Susan Close to ask her what our position is on it. So do you want to leave you to the end? I'll see if I've got a response. Oh no, you're muted.
Yes, otherwise I could, because Susan has provided a response to us to that question as well. So I could jump in at the end if you haven't heard back from her.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. Matt, AJP's position.
Yeah, we're against it, obviously. It's debatable whether it's renewable. I know, it doesn't produce carbon dioxide, but the radioactive material itself isn't a renewable resource. So for that reason, we'd be against it. But obviously, the waste is just a whole nother, the leaking into the ground. If we have leaks, the disrespect too of the federal government just kind of imposing its will, on South Australia and the Indigenous groups in the area too. So it's a big no from us. We would be strongly opposing it, and we really need to actually be a very loud voice, and stand up in solidarity for this not to go ahead.
Great, thanks, Matt. Brock, Greens view.
Thanks, Craig. I don't remember South Australia being consulted when they set up Lucas Heights. So it's a bit rich for the federal government to then turn around and suggest that South Australia host a nuclear waste dump based on its activities. So the Greens will be fiercely opposing this.
Great, thanks, Brock. Nadia, have you heard back from Susan? Or
I do, I have. Okay. So we think the Bangala people should have a right of veto over the proposal, and that the whole process has been flawed, and our preference is for the current proposal to be abandoned, and a thoughtful and considered process for the long-term management of our nuclear material to be initiated.
Great, thanks, Nadia. And Susan. Next question is around protection of the places we love. So we've got some fantastic areas under protection in South Australia already, but there are certainly other areas which deserve greater protection. Whether it's up places like Kungi Lakes in the north of the state, or around the Coorong and Lower Lakes. There's a range of exciting opportunities, protection of southern right whales as they enter the waters of Encounter Bay to give birth. So we're looking to see what your vision is around looking after those places that we think are special in terms of nature. So what opportunities there are and what management you'd be looking for to make sure that they are better looked after. Brock, perhaps start with you for this one.
Thanks, Craig. For a lot of those places, part of their incomes are related to tourism. So instead of facilitating things like mining operations or logging in some areas, we'd like to try and help cultivate those tourism industries, which are more sustainable going into the long term. So we'd like to help build those industries in a sustainable fashion. And we also we want to extend those general protections for those areas as well. So because we know that tourism sometimes can build up to a point where it starts impacting the local environment and starts ruining the sites that people are going there to see. So with community consultation, we'd like to go down that particular road or that style, if that makes sense.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Brock. Matt, what's your view?
Okay, I'm going to talk about a particular area that I love, if that's okay. And that's the Port River and the dolphin sanctuary in the Port River. I noticed your recommendations in the document that we are kind of all talking about tonight was for a whale nursery. I've spoken to a lot of people around the dolphins around Adelaide. And there's a really strong need to have a dolphin nursery at Angus Inlet. So that would be something that's really important. It's been a real travesty to see what's happened to the dolphins in the last few years. I have an extensive list. I won't go through all of them, of all the dolphins that have died in the last 3 years, and it's horrific. A number of them blunt force trauma to the head by being hit by boats. Many others getting fishing gear from them. There was a really gruesome series of photos from a Star, who is a beautiful dolphin in the Port River, full of fishing gear, heavy fishing gear. So I was very delighted to see your recommendations for the ban of heavy fishing gear, reduction of speed limits. Having rangers full time to monitor and patrol that space to make sure that those new laws that we put in place actually get followed up. There was another thing I was going to talk about, and I just gone blank on it. There's actually legislation really concerning that restricts the ability for any sort of investigations into what's actually going on with the dolphins at the moment. So a number of them are dying from mysterious illnesses, and because autopsies can only be done obviously after the dolphins died, it's really difficult to work out what the actual cause of death was. So there's been a lot of inactivity around dolphins. Even the ban on heavy fishing gear, that's something that should have already happened, and it's not happened for whatever reason. It's just been stalled and stalled and stalled. And it makes me really sad because, Brock was talking about tourism before. The bottlenose dolphins in our metropolitan waters are extremely rare. We are, I think it's one of 2 ports in the world that actually is lucky enough to have, dolphins there. And everyone loves dolphins. I mean, it's my favorite animal. And, I think most people are horrified at the thought of so many of them dying. I was One more thing. Yeah, so I'm a teacher. I've mentioned that a couple of times, and I've consistently taken kids to see the dolphins in the Port River over the last 20 years. And 2 years ago, it was the first year that we didn't see a single dolphin on the day. And it was a real tragedy, that to explain to the kids that, well, unfortunately, the dolphins are declining in number. And if we don't actually do something really, really urgently, there's going to be none left. So, yeah, look, I obviously there are lots of other spaces that we need to think about as well, but I thought it was a great opportunity to actually, talk about something that I'm really passionate about myself. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thanks, Matt, and I certainly can hear that passion in your voice. So Nadia, your thoughts on this one?
I also love dolphins. I'm right with you, Matt. So I think one thing is that the Liberals, obviously I agree with Brock in that we want to encourage tourism and want people to enjoy our beautiful natural environments. And again, like Brock said, we also need to be conscious of how that tourism and the development required for that tourism affects the environment. So you guys are probably aware, but in case anyone isn't, like under the Liberals, they have used regulation to undermine environmental protections so that they've allowed developments of under $1 million in the Flinders Chase National Park to avoid developmental approvals that are able to be in. And so none of the new money in the 2020 budget was allocated to conservation efforts. Instead, it's just directly towards new buildings, and I don't really think that should be the priority in our national parks. If we're elected, we'll keep working with locals. I know this is something that Susan Close is really passionate about as well. And my dad used to take me there when I was little a lot, and now takes my little human. But work with the Save St Kilda Mangroves Coalition to develop a restoration plan for the damaged areas of the mangroves. And Labor will also investigate further protections for some of the important biodiversity hotspots in the Lake Eyre Basin, including the Goyder Lagoon, the Callacoopa Creek region, and I'm sorry if I've pronounced it incorrectly, Coongie Lakes, Ramsar site. Is that right? You can correct Craig.
Yeah, Coongie Lakes, yeah.
Thank you, there we go.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are a few things that we're keen to get into.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Nadia. And lovely to hear the mention of the St Kilda mangroves. We're really looking forward to a restoration of that incredibly important area. So that feels like it's come to the end of our conversation tonight. So we've got time for a quick summary statement from each of you, and I might go in reverse order. Starting off with Brock, then Matt, then Nadia. So just a couple of minutes, just in terms of anything you think you've missed or would like to add tonight.
Thanks, Craig. Look, from my perspective as a candidate, I think tackling climate change is a big and daunting problem that requires a lot of action on many fronts. And I think we've discussed many of those fronts tonight. And I think this is a challenge that South Australia can prove itself more than equal to. And we've already demonstrated that with stuff that we've done in the past. So for example, when we built the battery in response to the big storm in 2016, that was a proud moment for me as a South Australian resident to go, oh, look at what we've done. And look at how that can be used by others and replicated indeed here in South Australia to address the climate crisis. And yeah, as I said before, there's opportunity out there if we're willing to take advantage of it here in South Australia. And it's not all doom and gloom, but we just need to make sure that whoever wins government come the next election, that we've got strong voices there holding that government to account and making sure that we've got action on climate change.
Great, thanks, Brock. Matt, your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Brock. Yeah, we really do need to remember that this is urgent. The conversation, my last thing about dolphins being urgent, I think that does reflect the bigger picture as well. One of the reasons that I joined this party was that I'm concerned about the future. And, when we've seen what's happened in the last couple of years, we had bushfires, at the start of it all. as a result of, climate inaction. We had lots of very, very angry people. And then, and that was all over the place. That was in South Australia. We nearly completely destroyed Kangaroo Island. And then we've been faced with this pandemic that's just, it's almost dwarfed the bushfires, as terrible as they were. I remember, initially Kangaroo Island was saying, come to Kangaroo Island, and then it was don't come to Kangaroo Island, So, there's a lot of confusion about what's happening now. We need to do things. We really need to do things. And, I've mentioned at the start the impact of animal agriculture. It's been heartwarming in a sense that, our biggest meat magnate has decided to be involved in, plant-based protein, and there's this big investment, $378 million into this, or whatever it is. But I hope that it's a move in that direction, and not just broadening and maintaining our big animal agriculture systems as they currently are, because we really need to change that. And it's going to be hard. It is going to, I've mentioned a couple of times, things aren't always going to be easy. And certainly we would need to support the people in that industry to transition to other industries, to re-educate farmers in plant-based farming, and workers in those industries as well. That, to work in a slaughterhouse, goodness gracious, I think there would be lots more jobs that people would be happy to go to than to have to face that every day. So look, that's my big push, and that's what I would be pushing for if I were to be in Parliament, and that's certainly what the Animal Justice Party would be pushing for as well, with all our other policies too. But we need to do something. Come on, people.
Thanks, Matt. And finally, Nadia, your concluding statement.
I just want to thank Craig and David and everyone who's organised it, and thanks Brock and Matt for coming along too, and for everyone in our community who's logged on today. I think a lot of us are on the same page. I'm sure there's always like little shifts, but it's been really good to be part of a discussion where we all want to protect our environment, we all want to reduce our emissions, and we want to help people to be able to move around safely in our community in a healthy way, and a way that is good for our environment. And we want our environment to be beautiful and green and protected, and we want to stop biodiversity loss and actually stop the degradation of our environment, and start working our way to improve it. And I just think one of the things we desperately need is a change of government on a state and federal level, if we want to ever see South Australia getting the right amount of, getting our fair share of water down the River Murray, because it is just diabolical, and we are getting in a lot of trouble when the eastern states are taking all the water, and we have a South Australian government who just says, okay, here you go. So I'm really, really keen to get in there and hopefully work with Susan and the Labor government, and work alongside anyone else who's in there to build a better future for us and for our children and our grandchildren, because without a healthy environment, we don't really have anything.
Great. Thank you, Nadia. And thank you to all our panelists and candidates who've presented tonight. We really appreciate your time. I know it has been a very busy campaign for you, and I'm sure you're out every day and every night. So we really appreciate you carving out some time to talk to us about these issues, which are very important for our part of the electorate. As I said, we will be sharing this video as far and wide as we can throughout the elder electorate to our members and supporters, and we really look forward to a positive rest of the campaign for you all. Good luck. Thank you, and we look forward to a brighter future for our state. Thank you for your attendance tonight. And thank you also to everyone who is in the audience. Really appreciate your time and energy tonight, and all your great questions. Thank you.